What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more punk rock. I'm back with one of my favorite bands of all time, the Subhumans. We're going to listen to the final tune on their The Day the Country Died album. I believe this is 1982. Do we have confirmation of this? Yes, 1982. I mentioned it before, of all their proper studio albums, this is probably my favorite, though EPLP, which isn't an album per se, but was released as a compilation of 4 of their very early EPs. That release might be my favorite, but it's sort of because that's the first Subhumans I encountered, so that was my initial entrepot into their excellent music and ideas. So yeah, regardless of that though, this album is very special to me. I like it from top to bottom. It's just a brilliant exposition of their sound, of their ethos, of their style, of their aesthetic. You'll notice I have the poster for the album here. You probably can't see the full thing. I also do have the CD version as well. So yeah, bottom line, I mentioned it a million times in other Subhumans reactions. They're one of my favorite groups ever. I think Dick Lucas is not only a very good songwriter and a very passionate singer, but I think he's a very good person as well. Even in the context of like a punk show, I remember when I saw them at the Showcase in Corona, California, a venue which no longer exists, but which they played a couple times, including this performance, which they recorded for Live in a Dive on Fat Records. It was the year before I saw them. I saw them a year after this at the same venue. But when I saw them there, there was this one guy who was like trying to stage dive repeatedly, and the way he would dive, he was like jumping with his feet. And like after the second time, Dick was like, "Hey man, just want to let you know, you're jumping on people's heads like when you jump in like that with your feet, like whatever." And like basically, and some people in the crowd were like cheering, like, "Yeah man, like if you're gonna stage dive, don't do it that way." But like even in the context of the show, he was trying to like, "Hey, you're gonna hurt someone up front. You gotta chill, man." Like he wasn't like in a draconian. He didn't like grab the guy or anything. But he was just like, "Hey, man, you're jumping right on people with your boots." So yeah, shout out to Dick, not only for his great songs, but again, he's. I think this would have been '05, so he would have been what, like in his mid 50s, I want to say. Or is that right? Because I think he was like early 20s in the 80s. So then fast forward, so I guess he would have been like late 40s maybe. But yeah, again, like it was, I just enjoyed that moment because it was like, you could tell like, he wasn't thinking about, oh, we got to do this song or like whatever. He's like, hey, like I'm watching the way you're doing that. You're going to end up hurting someone, like whatever. So anyway, this, as I said, is the last song on the album. It's called Black and White. It features the phrase "the day the country died," so it gives name to the album overall, even though it's the very final tune, and that's sort of the last line that gets repeated. So it's the line that the album leaves you with. Excuse me. Lyrically, it's pretty short. There's not a whole lot on the page. It just gets at a number of themes that they express throughout the album, and fair to say throughout a lot of their early material. It speaks to the way in which the state and oppressive, control-hungry elites use violence to achieve their aims, but that silence is not a reaction. Just kind of like seeing that it happens and maybe under your breath, man, that's not right, that's not just, but not saying something about it, that's not a proper reaction, or it's not a reaction that will lead to anything being changed. So there's sort of like a imploring of, citizens who do want on some level a just world in which, people are not, swallowed by sort of the channels of the modern industrial state and consumerism and so on in popular culture. So there's a chastising of people to do more to, bring about a more just and equitable society, but also there's a condemnation of the elites, again, who have a penchant to use violence and, in fact, are all the actions that they engage in, like seen as violence, like, oh, it's like, the violence, it's a one-word caption, but can you really, say that in just one word? And it's the way in social policies, or the way that like social services are cut for like poor citizens and so on. It's like violence can manifest in a number of ways, not just bombs from the sky or billy clubs to the back of the head in the street. So I think the song gets at like a number of different forms of oppression in the modern world, and it's basically saying that like if we don't stand up to it, if we're just silent and complacent and sort of accepting of the lot that, the modern, again, industrial society and modern nation states have sort of like confined us to, if we sort of tacitly or placidly accept that, then, remember the day the country died, because it's the day that these sins went unheard, unspoken. No one like brought them to wider attention, which maybe could tip the scales enough to, at least force some of these people out of power and ultimately, perhaps, bring about new and more equitable forms of social organization. So again, like if we don't speak up, if, silence continues to be our reaction in the face of violence, then remember the day the country died. So with that in mind, let's get to it. This is Black and White by the Subhumans on their 1982 album, The Day the Country Died. Can I just say it's funny to hear a British man say bullshit instead of bollocks? Yeah, we'll look into the inequity, we'll look into the abuse and corruption. Government report came back, nothing we can do. Bass was standing out there at the end. Oh, that's right, there's like a jet sound followed by like bass reverb. But yeah, a hell of a record for 1982. It's brilliant. Again, I absolutely love that album. I love the gritty sound of that final song. Not only does it, convey themes and ideas that are pervasive throughout the album and different, foci in one song versus another. But not only that, I love the intensity, like sonically, of that last song. I like the kind of like marching, sort of like plodding drum rhythm. I like the intensity of the beginning of each verse. Like each time, like at the beginning of the verse, Dick comes in like super strong, and it's actually ascending. Like the third verse, he begins with like more of a shout than either of the first two. So I like the sort of construction and progression of the song sonically. And yeah, again, it's just a great way to put a like capstone on an excellent album, one which is again very like cynical and pessimistic, but in many cases rightly so. And as Jello Biafra used to say, it's like the first step to solving a problem is identifying that it exists and accepting that it exists and that it has to be dealt with. So I think a lot of punk rock music, not just the Subhumans or the Dead Kennedys, but Bad Religion and Anti-Flag and so on, a number of bands. People will say, "Oh, they just complain about everything." It's like, no, what they're trying to do is cast a light on certain issues, and indeed, that's what this song is about. The idea that like, silence, it's no reaction, and if these sins are unspoken, then they're unheard, meaning like people aren't going to know about the injustices that are happening in this place or that place or in this context or that. And so again, if we remain complacent and sort of tranquil and accepting of our situation in these modern nation states, under these modern governments, then ultimately it'll be our cultural and intellectual death, and again the day the country died. So yeah, I do support and appreciate bands that will cast light on problems. And again, it's like, if you listen to the Subhumans or any of these bands that I just mentioned long enough and enough of their songs, enough of their albums, there are like moments of hope and optimism and at least like an enduring belief in sort of the better parts of humanity, or at least that like we can find relief in each other or in relationships and so on. So like, again, I think even if a band criticizes a lot of what's happening in the world, that doesn't mean that that they're just complaining or they're always negative. It means that they want the world to live up to the rhetoric that leaders and others often talk with. So again, the Subhumans will always be one of my favorite bands, if not like the favorite band. It's so hard. Again, Propagandhi was like the first punk band that I heard, so they're always sort of my favorite. But then Bad Religion, there's just a period of their work where I feel like they were untouchable, so they're kind of always my favorite. But the Subhumans, when it comes to that like real gritty sort of anarcho gutter punk sort of sound, they're kind of my favorite. So yeah, I have a lot of favorites, is I guess what I'm saying, but the Subhumans will always be one of them. So let me know what you think of the song. Let me know if you are familiar with this album overall, and if there's any other tunes on here I haven't reacted to yet. I've reacted to a few, but I say like no more than 2 or 3, or like 3 or 4 at the most. So I think there's 16 tracks, so still a lot of the album to go through. So let me know if there's one in particular you'd like to hear. Other than that, I will see you next time.